Information comes in, PE gives you information, and JI categorizes the information and says, where am I? What is this thing? What is the state of the now?
So you're talking about PE and JI, right?
Yeah.
And this operation is called a revision, right?
It's called revision, yes. The revisor functions. Yeah, because think about it this way. The loop is between, let me get more information, and then let me analyze this information, and then let me get more information and reanalyze it again. Analyze equals find out what it is. Like if you're going to analyze or diagnose a patient, what symptoms do they have? And you say, oh, you have this condition or that condition based on the analysis you do of them. So JI runs an analysis on whatever information is provided to it and says, oh, this is the state, this is the thing. And also this is the caliber. Oh, you have a high fever, a low fever, or you have a eczema on your skin or whatever it might be. But in itself, this is why it's called the revisor functions. In itself, those two functions are not really doing anything about it. So it's very much like a researcher. Oh, what is it? And let me understand it. What is it? And let me understand it. Kind of loops and loops and loops. More information, more analysis without ever going to like what then what?
JI wants to be, it's almost like JI is the priority here. The JI wants to be like, I want to know exactly, like in the example you gave the patient, right? The diagnosis, the ultimate goal of the doctor asking questions, the patient answering questions, then the doctor asking more, so on so forth. We keep on doing this until the doctor says, okay, I know what you have now. I can diagnose you with something, like your sickness is categorized, identified, then I'm happy. Then I don't need to ask you questions anymore.
Yeah, sure. That can be the end goal. It depends on the situation. Sometimes PE can also be the end goal, depending on a different scenario.
Yeah. Can you give me that scenario?
Yeah.
Please?
Yeah, sure. I love the diagrams. Let me pull it up again that we used for the four energetics so we can talk about it. Let me just pull it up here. It'll take me just a second.
Yeah, I can see it.
So if you're trying to diagnose a patient, information gathering aids in definitional processing. But if you're doing something different, like watching a movie, it helps to understand what's happening by running it through definitional processing. But ultimately, you're just trying to enjoy the movie, so to speak.
If you're watching a movie, your aim is to just have fun, right? Without PE, in some sense, we can't function. Without the libido of PE, the world is not fun. Do you know what I mean? Imagine if you just know everything in the world. Do you watch Star Trek? Have you seen Star Trek?
Yeah.
You're a Trekkie?
I don't know if I'd classify myself that way, but I did like The Next Generation. I didn't watch the originals. It's been a while.
You know Q, right?
But I know Q, yeah. Q. I know Q.
In one of the Voyager series, they went to the Q Continuum or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They discovered everything, talked about everything, literally everything they could talk about. And they're just sitting around bored because there's no new information. Like they know everything, omniscient, almost omnipotent. It's just like stagnation and don't know what to do. And I was just thinking, we just like, you know everything. There's nothing left to be discovered. And that's really boring.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. So there are some people, and I know some from this sort of community where they love, like they love to read books or learn about politics just for its own sake. They're not trying to achieve anything. It doesn't have to just be movies or something trivial. It could also just be language. Like somebody, oh, I like learning language. They're fun. They're interesting. They're exciting. They teach me about the world. And it's almost like people could live that way, and that is its own reason for being. You're in this world, you're in this reality, it's interesting, you want to know about it, and once you know about it, that is a satisfaction point. I learned something interesting. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. You naturally understand that. For me, the only thing is like whenever I encounter new information, I haven't, I guess, the libido to make sense of it. It's like I'm trying to make, the PI wants to be satisfied. Like he wants to basically make sense. I don't know if it's a PI or JI that makes sense of it.
Yeah. They are both different ways of making sense of it, depending on what we mean by making sense of it. But PI wants to, basically it wants to have a stable worldview of everything, and every new piece of information fits into the bigger puzzle. So it's all a consistent, stable, growing structure.
Yeah, it might be JI then. I don't know. If I want to learn if I encounter new things, it's exhausting because I want to make sense of it. The lack of clarity just bothers me. So that's what's holding me back sometimes from discovering new information. I shy away from it because I limit how much I'm exposed to it because it's just a lot of work, you know.
Every piece of information you intake, you have to process it a lot in order to integrate it. I imagine it's like you need to digest the information and it takes a while to digest it. And if there's a bunch on your plate, the whole table's full of information, you're like, whoa, hold on, it's too much.
I feel like whenever I can use information, I use JI first, and then PI comes later than JI to me.
That is interesting.
Because I need to distinguish and categorize. And then my PI just does its work by itself. It just does its work. That's what I feel like anyway.
I can see that in our discussions as well. You have very strong TI, if not dominant, but definitely it's one of those two types. It can't be anything else.
Which two types? NIFE
and TISE. So same functions, just whether it's TI above NI or NI above TI, but it's one of those T types.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Anyway, back to the point. So JE is pretty much like, it's trying to go to different states, right? It's like jumping between categories, right?
Jumping between categories. Yes. Category A, category B. How do you get from A to B? And the how is what JE tells you. It's an advisor. I like the metaphor we used of how you could think of the ego or the self as either the board of directors or the chairman of the company. And then there's the CEO that runs the executive part of the company. They tell you how to get, we want to make X amount of sales this year. How do we do it? Oh, here's how we do it.
Yeah. You have someone who's like, he manages the status of the company, right? How much we're producing, how many workers we have, how much money we have, how much money we're making. And that's JI, right? That's his reporting, like he's giving you categories. Is that PE? I'm not sure. In this example, maybe it's JI, right?
The functions work together as a team. If you have, let's try to roll with this metaphor to help us out here. You have a table, you're the chairman sitting at the table. One person is the CEO. Once the CEO is given the state of things, he will problem solve for you. On your other hand side, you have somebody that presents you the state of things. That is your JI person. The JI person will say things like, for example, the coffee machine is broken. The employer satisfaction rate is a 4 out of 5. People are complaining about noise outside that is bothering some people on floor 5. That's just the state of things. On floor 3, people are complaining about noise outside because the workers are working. That is taking the data and saying it either is or isn't the ideal state we want. When JI defines the state, it defines the state in terms of the condition that we want or the condition that it is or isn't that we want.
Yeah.
Like it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too far, it's too close.
Yeah. So if we, for example, like if someone said the information we have 3 workers, that would be PE, right? So that's would that be
PE is correct.
And then JI says that's too few. We need more workers. And now J is like, we need more workers. Then who's asking how many do we need? Maybe J is asking how many do we need? JI is like, J, do something about it. Do something about it, right? And J is like, how many do we need? What would you like? And JI is like, what's the ideal?
Exactly.
And JI would be like, maybe 10. We need 10. Then J is like, okay, how do I get to 10? How do I get to this ideal state?
Yeah, so
is that it?
Let's say that on floor 3, they are printing papers. The load of papers they have to print is way too high. They're stressed, barely keeping up with orders, and they need more employees. JI says they're overworked on floor 3 in the printing department. I think we need at least a couple more employees, like 3 more. I think 3 would be the right amount. And then there's reality. Of course, JE, the CEO, might say we can only afford 1 more employee. And then there's like a negotiating factor there. So there's a tension between JE and JI, where JI says, this is the ideal state we want to be in. And then JE says, we can't afford that. So let's make a compromise.
J is like, we need 10 more workers. And J is like, how do I get to 10? I can't really get to 10. That's where the reality is. Like, he's thinking, how do I jump to that state? And Jay is like, we can't do it. It's not possible. But I can tell you how many we can get to. We can get to 3, we can get to 5, we can get to 6, we can get to 7. But we can't get to 8, we can't get to 9, we can't get to 10. And these are your options. And Jay is like, I guess
I'll take 7.
We'll take 7. I'm not happy, but that's whatever. And like, that's, yeah.
Yeah, you know? Exactly. Yeah. This goes back to what I mentioned about the king and the prince. The prince always gets to be a little idealistic, right? There's these Miss America or Miss Universe competitions where, so ultimately the ideal is always world peace. Everybody's happy, everything's perfect. Miss Universe or Miss America, they're always saying, I want world peace, I want no hunger in the world. They get to say that from their place of perfection and idealism, but they're not the ones trying to make the numbers of the economy work. They're not the king or the queen trying to run the country and make these challenging choices. They're just sitting on a pedestal and saying, this is what would be perfect if we could do it, right? That's their job. They have a function to do that.
I was thinking, because you talked about perfection, I was thinking JE's ability is measured by its ability to jump between states, right?
Yes.
So that's why JE values power, because power allows you to jump between states, like skills, power, knowledge, even knowledge. It lets you jump between states. And yeah. So I think, but desire, like JI wants perfection, but its aim is to, I don't know, does JI itself want perfection, or is there something else that's like our own desire that's motivating it?
Okay, I do need to back up a bit and say that perfection is, the desire for perfection takes JI and a little bit of what I called ego before. So the libido incentive, it's the same way that, for example, wanting power is not pure JE. It's how JE manifests with our motivational center, our emotional motivation, adds and it creates it into like a power drive. That's more of an emotional limbic desire. So the limbic consequence of JI tends to be perfectionism. But at the cortical level, JI simply wants to perfectly delineate everything. It's almost like an OCD tendency.
But does JI want to create a single category for everything, or does it try to generalize as well? Does it want an infinite partition, or not really? Is that what it wants?
No, not infinite partitions. We're limited human beings, so we do as many as we reasonably can, but just enough to get things to feel in order in our lives. So that's ultimately what we're limited by, because we can only handle so much analysis. It's hard enough to just get the basics. Maybe if we were super intelligent, we could do some more than that.
Okay. So what would make JI unhappy? Like, just by itself, what would make it unhappy? Give me an example of what we, like, it's like, oh, I haven't delineated enough. I need to do it more. Like, can you give me an example when it realizes I haven't delineated? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, sure. Let's say that it's writing a paper or a script and it uses the wrong word. Somebody calls them out and says, what do you mean by that? I used that word incorrectly. And then they realize, oh no, that's embarrassing. They feel an embarrassment because they misspoke, or they used the wrong word, or they were misunderstood. And they would say to themselves, I didn't have enough clarity. So there's a self-consciousness when they fail to be correct, let's say semantically or categorically about things. Yeah.
Yes. So they run in categorization. They put the thing in the wrong category, pretty much. Yeah. What about creating the wrong category in the first place? Like, you created a category,
right?
And it's got two things in it, but they are so different that you should have differentiated the two, but you didn't differentiate the two. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I'll answer that with another example, because there are two ways this happens. Then there's a perspective of the JI users themselves, and then there's how others might see them. So let's say that you work in making wedding dresses, going back to your question of how might this affect JI negatively, let's say that a customer comes back to you, let's say that this bride comes back to you and says, I ordered a pearl-colored dress. This is not pearl-colored dress. What did you do? So scenario number one is this. You realize, oh no, I chose the wrong color fabric. JI will make you feel very self-conscious because you made it an imperfection. You miscategorized, therefore it's an imperfection. You see the connection between miscategorization equals imperfection.
Yes.
So I got the wrong color. Another option might be this. You might say, depending on the category was wrong, but JI might say to themselves, I gave you exactly what you asked for. This is actually the pearl color. And the client is not aware of what the color of pearls actually are. Maybe they're basing it off of something else that they know.
Oh, this is not like navy blue, it's midnight or something like that. And you're like, no, they are the same color. They are literally the same. They are the same color. But the difference is so small. Why are you fussed? It's like, no, I wanted midnight. I didn't want jaguar. I want midnight or something like that. And you're like, oh, okay, there is a difference. There is a difference because your eyes can see the difference. And maybe it matters that, I guess this is in service of something else. Because JI was happy with it. JI is like, I'm happy. It's the same category. The difference is so small. It's just like calling different shades of red. It's just like, but something else is not happy. And that's, I guess,
social
maybe
pressure.
JE is not happy.
The JE world, there's social pressure. This is where JI meets the outer world. This is where idealisms or personal categories meets the outer world.
Yeah.
And there's always some tension there because JI tends to be pretty good at resisting external pressure or influence on how it defines things. Like it says, I feel like this is the correct definition. I didn't make a mistake. You gave me the wrong information. You asked for the wrong color, but I gave you the right color. JI is not going to yield because JI can be very stubborn this way. It will just stay with its worldview. But if the JI person has some integrated JE, here's how it works. Pure JI will say, this is the category and I am standing on the right footing. I correctly categorized and you're mistaken. But JE will say, pragmatically speaking, if you didn't get the client's needs met, then actually you got the wrong order. Maybe you should have clarified to them what exactly you mean by pearl color or something, or midnight blue. If you had done that, you would have gotten the right color. So JE measures JI based on whether JI is actually delivering to the client, not so much if JI is correctly categorizing. So there's two different ways of correction. Delivering to the client what they want, or is correctness fulfilling the order the way that you understand the categories.
Because JE is pretty much like trying to get the job done. It's like, you have a job. I'm trying to get the job done, and you're not doing your job. We're not getting this. It's defeating the purpose of you doing this in the first place, right?
Yeah.
You can do this, and we're not going to get the job done. We're going to like not have any money. Pretty please, just fix this. Learn the difference, and we'll get this job done. GI has another state, which is like, oh, I have a state where I get money. I have a state I don't get money. I prefer money, and that means I have to change myself or something like that. So they don't do it.
JIs can sometimes quit jobs if they don't accommodate to them. It's a very common thing that happens.
Yeah. I have a friend who's like that. It's just like, because I think she does like Instagram jobs for like restaurants. Like she takes photos and stuff. And she just like, she gets like paid a lot of money for it. Or like, just like maybe 3 hours of work a week, and she gets paid a lot of money for it. But she just like, oh, I didn't like this person I was working with. So I'm like, what?
Oh my God.
I know you don't like, come on, that's a lot of money. You just tolerate it, right? She's like, no, I don't need this. I'm like, okay, all right. If that's what she wants, that's what she wants. Cool, very good. Perhaps we can. I'm happy with. Are you happy with my understanding of JE and JI? Is there more I need to understand about JI and JE, or is that the definition wise?
That's pretty much it, unless we want to get into coding, but I don't think we don't need to get into programming.
Maybe we could move on to T and F.
Yeah.
So if you could give me an example of like, do you have to examine T and F in the context of JI and JE, or can you look at T and F without JE and JI? do you think?
I think it helps to do both. First, if you do it in the general, we can get somewhere, but at some point we will need to put them into the functions.
For sure. So let's do it without and let's do it with either different.
Right. I want to start at the high level and a little bit on the neurological side because I think it matters to start there. So what I believe is happening, there's some research on this, is that there's parts of our brain that are focused for different things and different kinds of detection. So for example, I don't know if you know that human beings among animals are one of the most subtle when it comes to picking up on facial expressions, because we have an entire brain region dedicated to finely distinguishing subtle motions of the face. Unlike other animals, humans can, for example, notice a difference between a millimeter difference between where people are looking with their eyes, or if they're smiling or not really smiling, if they're a little bit sad.
Yeah.
So this is just one example of a brain region that has a purpose. Now, there's a phenomenology, which is how something registers to you, where you recognize, it's a mental recognition that something is an object or something that is alive. So there are some people who can't morally distinguish between something being an object and a living object. And those people are usually psychopaths, right? One of the reasons psychopaths are problematic sometimes is if they're curious about what's inside of this animal. Let me take apart this lizard and cut it open just to see what's inside. They don't stop to think, that's a living object. Don't cut it open just to see what's inside. Our minds have a system within it that recognizes this is a living thing, and it has a different set of treatments and rules to this living thing versus this is a non-living thing, and it's treated differently. There's pretty standard literature out there on living and non-living things. They're fundamental categories of our brain that make sense evolutionarily because we need to distinguish between things that are animate and inanimate, like predators. We need to distinguish between predators because they can chase after us, so we have to be prepared. Or friends and family. Oh, that's your mother, that's your kin, that's your same species, so treat them better. So this is what it relates to. So T is how to deal with inanimate objects, and F is how to deal with animate objects.
Yeah. So would you say, like, for example, before in the prehistoric time when we lived as hunter-gatherers, the psychopaths would just get hunted by prey, by things that prey on humans, right? Because in theory, they can't understand that this thing wants to kill me. Would that be it?
It's more psychopaths suffer not from knowing causality, but having sentimental attachment. For example, if there's a lion, they might still understand it as a causal mechanism. It's a thing that runs and it can cut my head off, and maybe I don't want that, so I avoid it. Just like if it was a bulldozer or a car. So you can still avoid a car even if it's not alive. So psychopaths do have self-preservation. What they don't have is this sense, because this is a living thing, it has moral conditions to it. For example, it has a life, and I have to have a moral question of, do I want to preserve this life or do I not? It has a different value.
Yeah, because it has desires, right? The living being itself, it has desires. So you can't treat it the same way. You have to treat an object. Yeah. So basically, it's just recognizing, so T versus F, coming back to this, is just recognizing that they are living things and non-living things, right? Does it further distinguish living things like humans from just as a sort of like as a subcategory of living things, or not really, would you say?
It's a spectrum of livingness. For example, a bug is a little bit conscious, but not as much as your cat or your dog. And your dog, not as much as like a chimpanzee, but then you would be the highest. Yeah.
Is there a clear divide between like a bacteria and like a piece of rock then?
It's a spectrum of how conscious it is. Conscious is a better word, since bacteria are 100% alive, but they're very minimally conscious. We care more about conscience than we do about necessarily technically livingness, but it is the same category.
Yeah. Well, what's the definition of conscience?
That it has an experience, that it knows it's having. So animals are pretty conscious. Trees are not very conscious because they don't have a nervous system, they don't have a brain, so they don't know that they're there, so to speak. There are some, especially like high FI users, because of the F function, high FI users tend to be more environmentalist because they don't want the trees to suffer, to be torn down. They matter. They don't want the trees to be killed because in their mind, the trees experience life and they experience suffering when you cut them down.
In your book, you talked about logic and ethic, right? Yeah, logic and ethic. How do we treat, you use logic as the way we treat non-living things, right?
Yes.
Do you want to explain this? You know what I'm trying to ask, so I'll just let you,
Yes, actually, yeah, thank you for that, because I do have to make a clarification as well. Let me do a screen share. I have the book open so we can also talk about it. I think I'm on the section here, right? Okay, so as I've mentioned before, the book has been updated a bit, or I should say the concepts are a little updated since this was made. I no longer like to use logic and ethic as much as synonyms as I did before. Whenever I used logic and ethic in the book, I wasn't actually talking about logic versus ethic as much as I was talking about living and non-living. So, because as you can see here, I literally define it this way. The mind is that which manages decisions pertaining to non-living things, the principle of logic. And ethics is decision-making related to living things. Yeah, so one thing to clear up, which I think can be semantically confusing, is that the word logic, there's some baggage to the word logic, because if you say something is not logical, it's like saying something is not rational. And a lot of people have argued with me over on Discord, which is why I changed my mind. Yeah. They argue with me saying that ethics are logical, for instance. It's logical. It's logical to have ethics, and it's not. So there isn't a dichotomy here between something either being logical or ethical. It's like the dichotomy is between logical versus illogical. These are the two: logical, illogical, ethical, unethical. These are how those two complement each other. They're not actually a dichotomy versus animate and inanimate.
Yeah. So what does T want? Is there a desire, or like, it's not really a function, is it? It's just like checking like, it just basically, what is T? Like, I know what it is, but how do you think about it in isolation?
There's internal discussions, maybe debates in our community as to whether T is just the absence of F or whether T is a thing in itself. For example, something being inanimate could just mean that it's not animate. If we have a neural circuit in our brains that recognizes this thing is alive, then that's a circuit. But if that circuit isn't activated, then the absence of that circuit equals T. Do you see the argument they're making?
I do see the argument. I do see it, because like living things that kind of object, but with something on top of it.
Exactly. And if you remove that thing on top of it, then you just get the pure thing itself. Right.
Yeah, like if it dies, right? If it dies, then, it becomes a problem of T. And sometimes you wonder if the act of murder is actually, it's like, that's what murder and killing is, right? You're transforming a problem that involves F into a problem that involves T.
I see. Maybe, although some murder is motivated by revenge and the emotional drive to harm. I mentioned in the book, the ethical function handles both preserving life, but also destroying life that is non-preserving. For example, killing a predator. The completely dispassionate answer would be, I have nothing to do here. I'm just an observer. But actually, to go out of your way to, let's say, to kill the lion that's trying to kill you is an ethical choice, in the sense that you're putting the priority of your own self-defense first. So actually, humans do kill out of self-defense. And killing out of self-defense is a kind of murder that is actually life-promoting, if that makes sense.
Okay, this is very good. You said F, right? F wants to preserve, it's not like it wants to preserve life, because as you've said, it can choose to end life as well, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, how describe it? It's, what does it do?
It handles the questions pertaining to living things. Handling the questions means surviving what needs to survive and deleting what needs to be deleted for the sake of that survival. We squash ants, we squash spiders if they're going to harm us. The F function tells us, danger, my baby's here, the spider's going to harm my baby, let me squash the spider. That's an ethical choice you make.
Would you say it knows what life needs to survive, right?
Yeah.
It knows what this life needs in order to stay living, right? Yeah. Distinguish between good and bad for life. Yeah. It knows. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's moral judgments more generally. Good versus evil.
Yeah. What good or bad for life, for any life, right? For the life it sees, in particular life. And what about T then?
One thing I say in the book is that accuracy versus inaccuracy is to T what life versus death is for F. But let me look again what I wrote because they're similar.
You did write accuracy, I remember. Even though I have the booking, I remember I was reading it.
I say, consistency versus inconsistency is to logic as life versus death is to ethics. So in a way, it's an impersonal process. It's dispassionate.
But what does it want, though? I don't know what, like, in the symmetry, like, ethics is, it knows what's good or bad for life, right? What does, in the same sense, what does T know?
Wants is a kind of a weird word for T because it's trying to be dispassionate. Let me give you TI as an example. TI wants to know platonically and neutrally what are the categories of the world, not relative to their own preferences, but just almost universally.
Yes.
Like universal truths is one way to think about T. It's like things that are true, not biased by you as a person or any particular culture.
Yeah.
Yes. Although I do get into trouble with when talking to some types because, again, F will say that F it is a kind of truth, and you get into semantic debates about that with them. But it depends on the person.
No, it's not. It's not. But not with me, anyway.
But I think you and I think we're on the same page here. So I think what we can say, we can use this language and understand what we're talking about.
So T is like true or false, like not right or wrong in the sense of morality, but like what's true and what's false, right?
Yes.
And that's true and false. That's logical consistency, right?
Yes, logical consistency, or just factuality. Like, does it fit science? Is it true according to science, or is it logically consistent? Logical consistency would be more on the TI side, and is it scientific and causal is more on the TE side.
Yeah. Yeah, because like if you observe the sky, or that you say, the sky is purple, and it's obviously not, there's not really logical consistency there, because if you contradict yourself, you say something, then you have like whatever logic, then you contradict yourself, that's logical inconsistency.
Right. Exactly. So actually, this is a good example to jump off of for TI. So remember when I told you that the JI is a distinguisher, category distinguisher, right? So if you say, the sky is purple, that's a mismatch of categorization. You're putting it into the wrong box, because if you say the sky is purple, but then this cup I'm holding is blue, like the sky, are you also going to call this cup purple? You have to be consistent in your colors. Notice there's nothing about this semantic debate about the colors is necessarily about living things or moral questions. It's just the facts of how do we, but it's about classification, semantic categorization. What do you call this thing? What do you call that thing? Is this accurately placed in its right category? And that's not asking anything biased or emotional.
Would you say JE is because you have like in maths, right? In maths, you have axioms, right? Something like axioms that you can't really use as taken. It's like directly observed, or it's a choice, right? Kind of like convention. Something like that.
The math proofs, you mean?
For example, when I study real analysis, like real numbers or something like that, and you have something like the multiplication identity, which is anything multiplied by 1 is itself.
Yeah.
And that's an axiom. That's an axiom which you cannot prove. It's just a choice. It's like we're constructing this system and we're just using this.
Yeah.
Right. And like 5 axioms or something like that. Then everything, and everything in the real number system is derived from the interaction between these axioms.
Correct. And exactly. These axioms are just the choices of the categories that we use, right?
Yeah.
The JI categories, or you could say tautologies is another word.
Yes. Yeah. Tautology.
Yeah, so TI deals very strongly with axioms and tautologies. It creates and preserves axioms and tautologies that have maximal coherence.
Just kind of a side note, what's the difference between JE causality and something like NI, where you know how it will happen because of the pattern? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Sure. Patterns. So it's funny because in a way, I can see why there's an overlap. Patterns. So here's patterns, right? And here's causality, right? The overlapping area is that patterns can tell you what will happen by virtue of the pattern. But there's no causality necessarily in a pattern. It's just an association link.
Oh, correlation versus causation.
Exactly. Correlation versus causation.
Yeah, correlation. Because it's perception, right?
Yeah.
It's correlation based on association.
Yeah.
Correlation, it just happened to happen at the same time because causation implies correlation, but not the other way around.
Yes. So you could predict, for example, oh, Christmas is coming up. There's going to be these red and white hats. People are going to be wearing these hats. They're going to be putting up Christmas trees. You can understand that in a predictive sense because you've seen this pattern every Christmas. But if you ask why the red hat, why the Christmas tree, like what is the causality here?
People could just not do it. There's no causality. Yeah. But there's a strong correlation.
Exactly. Not everybody will do it. It's not like it's necessarily going to happen. It's just probably statistically, pattern-wise, it might happen. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it. All these things just fall together. So.
I feel the clicking happening in your mind. Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to the superstition thing we talked about and the karma thing. Like, NI might feel like something might happen because of intuition, a premonition, without thinking causally about whether or not it makes sense in terms of physical laws, of Newtonian laws, Einsteinian laws, or anything.
Well, if you use PE, it just always supports PI, right? Because you keep on observing the correlation, right? So you can't really use PE to verify PI.
But it could also debunk PI if PI has, let's say, it observed the pattern and it's like, oh, this is going to happen. But PE might say, look again next Christmas or look again next time. And eventually it could change the mind of PI because new information might restructure the pattern by showing that the pattern is weaker than they thought it was, for example.
Yeah. How does JE differ to PE when it comes to debunking PI? How do they debunk it differently?
PE would add more statistical counterweights so that the probability of the pattern reduces. But thinking causally is more like there's a logical discontinuity between what is being said. So there's no real causal link between this idea. Therefore, it can't be true. For example, some people might say that quantum physics and consciousness are linked in such a way to where there's a link between quantum mechanics and consciousness, but then JE might say, actually, the mechanism is unknown, or there's no mechanism that could make sense of that connection, therefore it's invalid. No matter how much data you're throwing at me, if it's not the right kind of data, it's not going to budge the causality.
It's like A does not cause B, even though A and B are happening. A and B are correlated, but you have no evidence to suggest that A implies B or causing B.
Yeah.
So there must be like C, something like C as a confounding factor. There's another factor present that you're not observing, and that's that's causing something, but you're just not observing it. Whereas PE is more like, PE can correct PI if PI's data is not enough, right? Because if PI like jumps to conclusion based on like 5 samples, and you're like, hang on a second, let's use PE and observe it 100 times more to see if the conclusion changes.
Yeah.
Whereas JE would just, it doesn't matter how many times I observe this thing happening, there's no sign behind it. You can't say it implies B.
So, for example, Richard Dawkins, he'll probably scoff at people who say, oh, there's a Virgin Mary figure on my toast or my tortilla. Oh, I burned the tortilla and it made the figure of Jesus or the Virgin Mary. And let's say not just one person did it, but let's say next year somebody else, and then the next year 5 more people have tortillas with the Virgin Mary on it. And then it doesn't matter how many more people have tortillas or toasters that have the image of Jesus on it. It's never going to make sense causally unless you explain the causal mechanism.
Yeah.
I think you got it. It's good.
You don't mind me asking like these sort of...
No, not at all.
Because you know what I'm trying to do, which is trying to be clear about things.
I love the way that you're thinking. I think they're clicking. I can see it in your facial expressions. I can see the connections forming. That's great.
Yeah, mapping CT's theories. That's what I like to do. My goal is to achieve clarity, to understand all the concepts, all your concepts. I'm trying to understand all your concepts, all your terminologies. So I'm going to go through your book. So going through your book means understanding like the 4 energetics and understanding like S and T and F, right?
Yeah.
And also understanding, I guess, the oscillations, right?
Yeah, the oscillations.
But like that's all part of model 2 because they all go into model 2, right?
Yes and no. Especially lately in my latest work, I've actually tried to unify, like they have different names, but they mean the same things. It's like talking about the same phenomenon in computer language or natural language, but it's the same conceptual structure. The reason I make Model 2 is so that I can study something in the scientific department, because adjectives and words, they're not precise enough to do math on them, to run code on them, but you could run code on code. So that's what I want to do. But basically what I mean is to say, all of the same elements are in both Model 1 and 2.
Yeah, I've done computer science. And I actually don't like the irregularity or lack of structure from human language.
It's very messy. An adjective is very poorly defined. Your terms have to be mathematical terms. You have to translate your terminology into something like a mathematical algorithm or formula.
I like the purity. So you have no problem from me. For that, we understand each other on average. And I think I'm going to try to understand the subsequent theories, and then I'll move on to tautology, I think.
Awesome. Perfect. All right, man.
Thanks.
Have a good one. Yeah. Take care.